Cool. Yeah, that's right.
Okay. I can still see it. There's still a few more people coming in, so I'm admitting them as I go for you, Kate. So good afternoon, everyone. As Kate said, I'm Dan from Severn Wye Energy Agency. We're a charitable organisation based in Hynham in Gloucester, and I'm just going to run through our sort of greening homes presentation for everyone. As Kate said, if you can sort of put questions in the chat box, and we'll get some at the end for you. And yeah, I'll make a start. So Severn Wye as a charity provides sort of support in quite a few various different ways. Our main area is fuel poverty support. So that's helping people on sort of low income or receive benefits. We also do training and education. We've got our own sort of like installer network for people that are looking to installers to do work. A lot of work on decarbonising households, community partnerships, especially in Wales. And we've got a target 2020, 2030 decarbonising businesses as well. We also work with social housing providers on set schemes to help with heating and insulation. And a lot of our sort of focus is on basically making homes warmer for everyone. That's what our Warm and Well advice line is for, which is a project within Severn Wye itself. It's funded by the local authorities in Gloucestershire, as well as Gloucestershire's Clinical Commissioning Group, provide energy efficiency advice to residents in the area. So what I'll just be covering is why buildings matter on the journey to carbon neutral. Just a brief introduction to retrofit and how that works for a property. A little bit on low carbon heating and renewables. 3 case studies for yourselves, and we'll let you know about how you can sort of fund improvements as well as other services that we've got to offer. So this is a little quote from the Committee on Climate Change. We cannot meet our climate objectives without a major improvement in UK housing. You might have seen in the news over the past month or so, they looked at sort of flats in the London area, I believe, and you might have seen the images on TV of mold on the ceilings, there's water dripping through and that sort of thing. So yeah, it's basically improving those sort of properties and making them sort of future proof, because the majority of housing stock is what we'll be living in over the next sort of 50 years or so. It's already been built. Carbon emissions from UK buildings, so you can see nearly 3/4 of that is made up of what we call domestic dwellings, with the other 30% from sort of public and commercial, and public being sort of like your libraries and that sort of building. So you can see the importance of why we need to sort of get those carbon emissions down in domestic properties. So actually, the actual energy use within a property, up to sort of 69%, goes towards heating and hot water, which is why we sort of focus on that area above anything else. And we use the Warm and Well as well as government grants to focus on reducing the heat loss of a property to then improve its thermal comfort. There are obviously challenges to this. So you think of your heating source. A lot of rural properties use either sort of LPG or oil to heat their properties. That's obviously very carbon intensive. A lot of emissions from that. You've got solid walls, so that's whether that's brick or stone. Can be quite difficult to retrofit with insulation at times, but not impossible. Properties with lots of windows, or what we call cold bridging.
I'm going to eat my lunch. I'm hungry.
Areas where you can lose heat from properties if things aren't installed correctly.
No, it's okay. I'm just listening.
Got the old housing as
Sorry, Dan, can I just interrupt you? Could everyone just turn their mics off, please? Because there's a few that we can hear what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you. And we've got our sort of old housing or traditional housing, which obviously can come with grade listings, which makes it slightly harder to retrofit, but again, not impossible. So what is retrofit? It's basically a whole house approach to improving a property. Whereas before we looked at just sort of single measures, so you just put in cavity wall insulation and that was that, or loft insulation, and that was it. It's now looked at as a whole house approach. So you'd look at all of those things in one. We wouldn't necessarily recommend putting them all in at once because obviously they all come with their own challenges, which is why you sort of do like a phased approach. So you could, for example, do external wall insulation with replacing the windows at the same time to meet that external wall insulation, so there's not a cold bridge there. And then what you could do after that is possibly look at doing your loft or other areas, sort of like making the property more airtight. And then that means you've got a lower heat loss for your property. And then you'd look at then developing the heating system, either to a renewable system or something that's more efficient, like a highly efficient gas boiler. It's a fabric first approach. So that basically means insulate the property first before doing anything else. And it's quite highly intense sort of in its risk. So at each stage, there's quite a few steps to go through. You will go through a project and it's rated from A to C. By inputting what you're going to do will dictate which route you take, with A being the sort of the one that's least risk, to C which is higher, which would probably be your sort of more traditional buildings. And the idea is to get it right first time, to future-proof the property, so to make sure there's not going to be mistakes like there is at the minute. So a retrofit roadmap basically works by looking at how the building sort of works itself, how it's constructed, its current thermal performance, the damp at the property if there is any, and how it's currently being used by the occupier. The last one's quite an important one because beforehand that wasn't taken into account. It was just based on averages, maybe taken from an energy performance certificate. We now actually have to ask them on the retrofit assessment, for example, how many times do you use the shower, because that could affect the electric rates at the property. And we also look at the current, say, gas and electric tariffs as well. Maintenance is the first thing, so basically getting the building ready to be retrofitted. So say if you've got either a crack on the outside or the inside of the property, rather than just putting insulation over that, almost like paper over a crack, you have to make sure that crack is fixed to a high standard and then insulation added over the top to prevent any issues in the future. So you insulate first, you get the air tightness right, and then you have to ventilate because the property is airtight. So now we need to make sure that the ventilation is enough for the property, but we'll go on to more of that in a second. And then, as I say, once you've done all those first three, you'd then look at heating systems for the property and then the potential renewable options as well. So what we say with this is insulation and air tightness is obviously the cheapest, greenest energy is the energy you don't use, which is why there's such an importance on reducing the heat loss first. In this example, this is typical semi-detached 3-bed, I believe. So you can see that exactly 50% of the property is losing heat through the walls and the roof. you can see by improving both of those measures would help in reducing that heat loss from those areas, which are the larger areas of the property. Air changes is basically from uncontrolled drafts in this occasion. So once we installed phase 1 retrofit, which would be installing wall insulation, doing a loft top up and new windows with no attention to any of the drafts or any thermal bridges, you can see that the walls and the roof only make up 19% of that heat loss now. So then you look towards reducing your air changes at the property and reducing those thermal bridges as well. I'm not sure, some of you may know these types of installations already, but we'll run through them. So you've got solid walls, you can do them externally, internally, or potentially a mixture of both. That would tend to happen if there's sort of like planning constraints. So a lot of properties can have changes made to the rear, but can't have those same changes made to the front. For example, new double glazing or external wall insulation. Obviously, you need to consider the heritage of older properties and their solid wall properties as well, whether they're brick or stone, and the thickness of those and the condition as well. Ideally, solid walls would be insulated with a vapor permeable insulation to allow the movement of vapor through there, as would happen in those sort of walls. Cavity walls would just have cavity wall insulation in. You can do external or internal wall insulation as well if you're worried about sort of water ingress into the cavity and making that insulation become wet and cause issues on with mold on the inside. Floor and underfloor insulation is possible. A lot easier to do if it's suspended timber floors, because you can put in a robot these days and spray foam up underneath. Obviously, with concrete floors, you'd need to take up the floor. Basically, the property would need to be empty to insulate those. The recommendation for loft insulation is 400 millimeters, or will be very soon. Not every property is going to get to that because of ventilation being important. So you don't want to go all the way up to the rafters if you've got a very shallow loft space. And you've also got the law of diminishing return. So say you have 250 to 300 millimeters of loft insulation, it's probably not going to make too much difference going up to 400 in that case. So we've got natural vapor permeable insulation. So that's things such as wood fibre, your hemp, sheep's wool, cellulose. The benefits of these are that they don't have any effects to your health. There's low embodied carbon. They're not toxic. They can be biodegradable, and they're vapor permeable. The cons are they tend to be more expensive because they're not necessarily mass produced. Thicker depths are required. So, for example, you might need, say, 500 millimeters of sheet wall compared to your standard rock wall, where you might need, say, 250. Obviously, that can be determined by a accredited installer. They tend to be more expensive, thicker depths, and can cause issues in cavities. So that relates to wall being blown into cavity spaces. So not always the insulation will either settle down over time, creating a sort of cold spot around the top, and it can also get caught on the ties between the outside and inside skin walls, meaning that it doesn't actually go all the way down, so you'll get cold spots on the inside wall of properties. You can get your manufactured vapor permeable as well, which is sort of like your standard boards and things. You can also get aerogel, which is very useful for small properties that don't have much space, because you can have a thin layer of that, which acts in insulation properties the equivalent of double the depth. You might be more familiar with these types of insulation with synthetic sort of non-vapor permeable ones. So these are usually used on, say, like newer build properties that what the vapor isn't going between the walls inside and out. Probably had a Celotex and Kingspan boarding. You can also get polystyrene, recycled plastic, and insulation blankets. Your mineral and rock wool, which is in the picture there, which you usually find up in your loft spaces at the minute. The pros to this is that they are cheaper than natural insulation because they're sort of more mass produced. They do provide high thermal performance with thinner applications as well. But then you've got the cons of actually manufacturing the materials. The embodied carbon would be obviously more in them and less, and they're non-degradable. Off-gassing is, if you think of, say, when you have a new carpet installed and the smell of that carpet is basically sort of chemicals being released. So that could be the same, say, like foam insulation with potentially harmful effects to your health coming off that insulation. And you can get possible moisture risk if they're installed into the wrong type of property, or if you just go over the top of an area that's prone to mold and hasn't been rectified before the insulation goes on. So we're looking at air tightness now. So once the insulation has been installed, then the percentage of energy loss through the uncontrolled ventilation increases. By uncontrolled ventilation, mean any sort of like gaps around pipe work or around windows or under your doors, that sort of thing. So once the measures are installed, such as tapes, membranes, plasters, then adequate extraction must then be planned and installed next, to then ensure that you've got enough ventilation still in the property. There's a phrase of sort of insulate right, build tight and ventilate right, which is what is being used at the moment for retrofit. So let's go on to the ventilation and heating with building services. There's several different ventilation options available. I won't go into all of them in too much detail. This is a whole house approach, so it's very difficult to install in properties that have already been built, just because of the ducting required, and you need a biggish space for the actual air handling unit as well. The idea being that you remove the stale air and bring fresh air into the rooms where you need it the most. Quite often warm air is extracted from places such as bathrooms and kitchens where the moisture content can get quite high. You may be more familiar with these sort of ventilation options. So you've got intermittent extraction. That's literally just in your bathroom or kitchen. It might be on a pour cord, or you might have a timer with it. They're great for, obviously, if you're using it there and then, but if they're not running long enough, then you can still get high moisture content in the property. The next step up to those would be installing an intermittent extractor with a humidity sensor. So these will turn off once the correct humidity has been reached in those rooms. Therefore, you avoid, well, you lower the risk of any sort of mold or condensation forming in that area then. We've got purge ventilation, which is literally just opening a window. Trickle vent, which play an important role, especially if you're in a property that's got windows either end. So make sure they're open, so you've got a cross flow going there. And there is a continuous extract with heat recovery, which is more advanced, where we bring in extract air, but also extract the heat from that extracted air for the property as well. So we'll move on to low carbon heating and renewables. So we've got your air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, biomass, high heat retention storage heaters. They're low carbon just because they run off electric. Obviously, they're not ideal for heating a property necessarily, but that's why they're on there. And we've also got solar thermal and solar photovoltaic as well. You could obviously with solar thermal, that's usually like an extracted tubes, like you can see on the picture on the right. But you can get panels for these now as well, and they just heat the hot water at the property, but you'd need a hot water tank. And there's several different options available now with solar PV. You can put in diverters to help run a heat pump, or you can put it to sort of like charge your electric car as well as the battery storage options as well. So air source heat pumps, the way they work is they extract heat from outside air. They can be used to cool properties as well, but a lot of time we use them for heating. Usually work best at lower temperatures, and for those with underfloor heating, that's usually the best way to do it. You can get air to water or air to air. So air is basically sucked into the unit, compressed, and then the heat from that is basically transferred into the water that goes around the property. You can get air to air, which just is, as it says, brings air in and then pumps that warm air around properties. You've also got one where you can extract water, the heat from water as well, if you live next to a river. You can obviously link them up with solar PV, but it's a good option, but you'd be hoping that there's winter sun as well to have a true effect with that. You can just use a heat pump to do the heating without the hot water. There are different options available for hybrid systems now. A lot of the time when we look to retrofit, we would do the heating and the hot water. You'd have quite a big sort of thermal store with the property. Ground source heat pumps, they can either be done in like the slinky style, which is in the picture, or they can be drilled down vertically from the ground. They basically work in the same way as an air source heat pump was in terms of the radiator and the system inside. And they've got to be quite careful. I know we had a session with Kenza that they're not extracting too much heat from the ground. There's got to be some heat being replaced back in once that heat's lost, but they'll know better on that for you. Biomass heating is also a renewable option. The only thing you've got to think of with this is that we've need to have space for the boiler as well as a store for the wood as well. And as you say, consider your sourcing. Is get it from a renewable source, but try and get it as close as possible. Don't necessarily want to be importing it from, let's say, Scandinavia, because your carbon footprint's going to be quite big still. So we've got 3 historic buildings that classed as hard to treat properties. This one's a traditional stone cottage in Painswick, which had a sloping ceiling installation completed. Basically, that means that they've got sort of a vaulted ceiling. There's no loft space as such. They had internal water station installed and had their boiler replaced and controls. It saved them just over 2,000 annually and reduced their carbon footprint by 59%. So quite a good saving there for them. Traditional stone cottage in the Cotswolds, again, had internal and sloping ceiling. Also had a mixture of double and secondary glazing and LED lighting, which again are 42% reduction in CO2 savings. And the final one is an end terrace stone house, which had quite a few measures on the loft insulation top up, both types of solid wall insulation, floor insulation, triple glazing, replacement boiler, solar hot water. So this is a case where they had to have internal wall insulation on the front and side of the property due to planning, and they had external wall insulation on the rear of the property. It was important that the internal wall insulation sort of overlapped slightly onto the external wall side to prevent a cold bridge occurring in the corner. And again, over 50% reduction in CO2. So how do you go about funding and arranging? So basically, Warm and Well can access funding to low-income households through local authority delivery schemes. We are waiting for what's called Eco Forward to start in April 2022, and we're hoping that can offer solid water and more ventilation funding. And all new schemes focus on whole house solutions now, like I say, rather than just installing one measure. Always encourage people to call just to run through a situation because you never know. And we've got quite a lot of different experiences in the team as well, so it's really good. Wider funding outside of sort of that would be the Clean Heat Fund, which you might have heard of, which is £5,000 towards heating, especially air source heat pumps, and that's available in April 2022. So potential next steps for yourselves, if you've got what's called an Energy Performance Certificate, or EPC for short, they can be quite a good starting guide to see what your property has already insulation heating wise, and it will have recommendations on there on how to improve its rating. I would say don't treat them as gospel necessarily, because there are still a few EPCs out there that aren't necessarily correct, but if you're ever in doubt, we can always sort of come out and check for you, or just chat through the situation. Look to do retrofit surveys, possibly create your own plans, find a retrofit assessor or coordinator, and they'll be able to provide the best advice on moving forward for your particular property. Consider your budget and approach, whether you want to do the whole thing in one or just phase it across a period of, it can be years for that. Talk to others who might have undertaken retrofit, research, and obviously attend future talks, and possibly visit the Trustmark site for registered installers as well. It's also important to remember there's no such sort of property that's a typical house or even to be retrofitted. I do a lot of surveys and you get different things crop up each day. No house is the same, even if it's in the terrace, or each property will be slightly different. So you could obviously look at bulk buying goods if you're doing it as a sort of cooperative. Become an energy agent, or just talk about retrofit to friends, neighbours, and see what experience they've had. What we can do to help is offer advice over the phone. We do provide a range of energy surveys as well. I think you might be getting a copy. I'll speak to Kate about that for these links, and access for home energy efficiency improvements as well. It's just a few top 10 tips. You might have seen quite a few of these already. Just about turning your thermostat down, programming your heating, checking your fuel tariff, which is quite a hot topic at the minute with everything going up. It's looking like everyone's probably going to have to stay put on their variable tariff until April time, when it would be the time to look at sort of changing then, hopefully with some fixed rates. We've also got a link to Energy website, which is our local installers website. We are looking to update that at the minute to make it more up to date, but that's a good guide, and you can speak to one of the advisors or myself about people that we use quite regularly. I'll be more than happy to let you know. The Trustmark website you can use for those that are using the PAS 2035 standard. So that's a standard that's being used at the minute for all government funded projects. If you're not using funding, then installers can use basically to older standards. So just go on there and check that you're getting installed to do 2035. The MCS website is good for those looking at sort of heat pumps and solar PV, any sort of renewables. They've got accredited installers. Energy Savings Trust is just a good one to go on for getting rough prices for work and seeing how much possibly you could save. They've also got a solar PV and renewable heat incentive calculator on there as well, which is really good. The renewable heat incentive is coming to an end in April, but it's the solar PV and is a good one to go on, because you can see how much you could possibly put on the roof, as well as how much you can benefit from having those. And then there's the energy performance certificate EPC register, where you can find if you've got a certificate online. Again, that's the Warm and Well advice line stuff and our website, and that's Severn Wye if you need to contact us. I appreciate it's quite a whistle stop sort of run through. So I'm obviously happy to answer any questions, and if anybody wants to sort of ask questions afterwards as well, I'm happy for Kate to give out my email too if needs be. Thank you.
So I think we had a couple of questions in the chat. If I just read them out to you. Let me find them, scroll up. Ada was asking, do you know if there's a recommended minimum overlap of internal and external insulation on the external walls?
It would, an installer would be able to let you know, but I think from memory from my retrofit course, you'd be looking at to overlap at least sort of like about 100 mil, just so you've got that corner covered off basically.
Yeah. Okay. On the so the case studies you had at the end there, where you said the yearly energy saving in monetary values, do you know how much those whole house retrofits costs? I think we've had a couple of people inquire, say, you know, how long will it take for me to actually see the benefit? Because if it costs you, say, 15,000 or more to get it done, £600 a year is fantastic, but if you've spent 15 grand, it's not actually a saving.
Yeah. So with retrofitting at the minute, it is probably more looking at your own sort of environmental footprint and reducing your own carbon emissions, rather than it being able to pay back over its lifetime. Obviously with the help of grants, that could make it more affordable. But you could be looking with some measures at sort of like a 25-year payback, which is obviously a long time for anyone in a property, to be honest. So yeah, it depends how you funded it, but the likelihood is you probably won't get that payback unless you've installed, say, like an air source heat pump or solar PV alongside, say, solid wall measures. Then you might get a quicker payback on that.
The grants that are available, are they available on any solution, or is it just certain types? And presumably is it just for low incomes, or can anyone access some funding?
Yeah, so we've got the local authority delivery scheme. That's going to give you the most options, because we can install sort of like solar PV on that as well at the minute. But there is a criteria, so you have to be sort of 30,000 gross or less, or receive a benefit on those ones. So there is still that cap. We do have a slightly more flexible criteria, but then you're limited more to your sort of like your boilers, cavity wall and loft insulation. That's for people who receive a benefit or you fall under a net income criteria. So we take into account net income, council tax, and we also did that mortgage as well. So obviously that's a bit more flexible in criteria, but you're not necessarily getting as much at the minute. Hopefully that might change come April when the Eco 4 comes out.
Walls. It's about retrofitting insulation.
Has anyone got any other questions?
Yeah, I did actually put hi, this is Nasser. I did put it on the chat. If it is possible to just expand a little bit on the underfloor heating and the air source heat pump. Could you just say a few words on that, do you think?
Yeah, no problem. In regards to when it would be best to put it in, I would look at doing it if you're sort of renovating a property, or if you've got a tenant property, if there's a void. Usually it's underfloor is better because of the way that the pipes are sort of like thinner, basically on the underfloor, so they don't take as long to warm up. It's absolutely fine with radiators. It's just a case that you might have to put larger radiators in, which isn't necessarily going to work for every property. So that's why sort of like the underfloor heating is a slightly better option. Probably answer a bit more on that if you wanted me to, if I haven't answered your question, sorry.
So it's actually, these are air pipes within the concrete, or within the concrete, or whatever the source of underflow is, right?
Yeah, so it would just be like a series of sort of like smaller pipes that you can rent. There are a few different options available. I know, like at our office, we've got underfloor that's got pipes. So you pick the desk that sits above a pipe, especially in winter. But yeah, that's how they would work for underfloor usually.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any restrictions on the type of property that the air source pump and the ground source pump would work with? Is there a minimum, like for the ground source, a minimum amount of pipage that you need? So if you're in a terrace property, you're not likely to have that.
Yeah. So with ground source, we had a talk from Kenda, and they said it was like about, could be up to 50 meters you need.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, but the
Need a field then.
Yeah.
Or rip up your whole garden.
Yeah. So that's why sort of like the vertical option is sometimes better, because it's just one single hole. So yeah, obviously you're quite limited in that regard.
Still access issues though, wouldn't there? Even if you're drilling one big
Exactly.
hole, if you're in the middle of a terrace,
Yeah.
that's going to be difficult.
Yeah, we've got a project in Strade at the minute that they're putting, I think it's 4 vertical pipes in for a block of flats.
Okay.
Yeah. I would say air source heat pumps, you've got a better chance. There's slightly less restrictions on those. And they are sort of usually a permitted development as well, so you don't necessarily need planning. I would say every property can be heated by like an air source heat pump or ground source, but you'd want to make sure that it's sort of like as heat loss is as low as possible before you put that system in. Otherwise you're just going to be basically throwing money at it, because it's going to be working so hard to heat the property. Sometimes if you're in a terrace as well with air source heat pumps, they do like a sound survey beforehand. So you might be sort of like too close to another property, so it would mean that you can't have it. So there's those sort of things to think about as well.
So there's a question here. There's a lot of chat on older building forums about enabling properties to breathe. Something us at Carrington Lime talk a lot about. And she's asked, does this not work against the underfloor heating options? Yeah,
it can do. Yeah. It just depends whether you've got a solid floor or a sort of suspended floor. A solid floor, it's not gonna let too much moisture in and out because it's concrete anyway. But yeah, you're correct with suspended floors. If you're covering over the top of that with some sort of heating, then yeah, it could cause issues, which is usually why you get the underfloor heating in sort of your solid floor properties rather than suspended.
And you can lay underfloor heating in limecrete as well. So if you are going the full hog with making it breathable, then it does work with limecrete.
There you go. I've learned something as well.
Just finding someone that knows how to do it, but
yeah.
That's the problem.
Well, I can just see someone's put in that it goes to North Yorkshire. No, so there is a warming well in North Yorkshire, but that's not the one. Just bear with me and I will get the right one for you. I'll pop it in the chat.
There's been, I did another question actually. There's been a lot of talk online about retrofit coordinators. Do you know when you need to use one of them, or if you're just doing up your own home and doing the odd thing, do you have to contact someone like official like that, or what even do they do?
So I'm a retrofit coordinator myself. So usually we get used from on sort of like a grant funded project.
Okay.
But you can just go and contact a retrofit coordinator to do the work for you. The only issue we're finding is because say like the insurances are so high for actually doing it, you'll find you might not get one to do that specific project for you. Retrofit assessment is something that I would probably recommend doing, because you can get what's called an energy performance certificate alongside doing that assessment, and it gives you more detail into how the property works. Yeah, it's a difficult one because it's all quite new at the minute still, and everyone's trying to find out how it all works, especially like with pricing as well, because there's not a set price for these sort of things, and there's very little guidance. So people can be charging hundreds and hundreds, and other people can be charging just like £100, which doesn't help.
What concerned me about them is that the qualification seems to be quite open to a lot of people to get, and I have concerns, particularly with us and our clientele, have very old properties. It's very niche. I would be concerned that these people that have maybe don't have the right knowledge to do it, because you don't really know what they've got. Have they just done that qualification and not really worked on old properties?
I know there was concerns when it first started with perhaps people not having that knowledge. It was a pretty intense course. But then afterwards you can do a traditional buildings course as well, which is what I've done a lot of. We've got 3 other coordinators, so we obviously just did that anyway, and a lot of us have got experience, and we talk to each other about traditional buildings. But whether, like you say, whether other people have got that, been fortunate to get that, is another thing.
Someone's just asked, can you use an accredited conservation architect instead of a retrofit coordinator?
I guess there'd be nothing against that. They might not work to the same standards, or they might even work to a higher standard. I'm not 100% sure. But they'd be able to give you a good idea.
So just making sure you've got somebody that has enough knowledge of your type of property, really. And any knowledge is helpful.
And getting a sort of right installer to do the work as well.
Great. Well, if no one's got any more questions, we'll wrap it up. We've recorded the session, so I will send it round. And if you do have any other questions once we've logged off, then please do drop me an email and I can pop them to Dan and get an answer back to you. But thank you for coming today. We've got another session on Monday with Charlotte, who's Gloucestershire's, or used to be Gloucestershire's Conservation Officer, talking about listed buildings and things you can and can't do to them when you retrofit. So please do pop along to that one as well. If you can't make it on Monday, then we've got her coming to talk to us again in April, which you can register on the website for. But thank you, everyone, and hopefully see you all soon.